My name is Aurora. I am 29 years old and I have spent more years of my life apologizing for existing than I care to count. This is not a story of pure rage, though there is rage in it. It is not a story of pure triumph, though there is triumph in it too. It is the kind of story that does not fit neatly into a box, the kind that makes you sit at the edge of your bed at 2 a.m. and stare at the wall and ask yourself who you are when everything you were told about yourself turns out to be a lie someone else needed to believe. I want to tell it honestly, so I am going to start at the very beginning, even the parts that make me look small, because I think you deserve the whole thing. I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside. I mean that literally. My mother, Vivienne, was obsessed with appearances. The lawn was always cut. The curtains were always pressed. We had a welcome mat that said "Bless this home," and every Sunday we sat in the third pew from the front at church and smiled the smiles of people who had everything figured out. My father, Leonard, was a man of very few words and very strong opinions, and those opinions, almost without exception, were about what I was doing wrong. I was the second of 3 children. My older brother Philip was the golden one, star athlete, natural charm, the kind of boy who made adults lean in when he talked. My younger sister Daphne was the baby, and Barbies in my family were untouchable. That left me, Aurora, in the middle, and the middle in my house was a very dangerous place to be. I was 7 the first time I remember my father saying it clearly. I had knocked a glass of orange juice off the table at breakfast, an accident, plainly an accident, the way any 7-year-old's arm moves too fast in the morning. He looked at me across the table and said in a voice that was almost calm, which made it worse, "You know, Aurora, you are the problem in this family." My mother did not correct him. She got the dish towel and cleaned up the juice and said nothing at all. I told myself I had misheard him. I told myself that for about 3 years actually, but he said it again, and again. In different words sometimes, "You make everything harder. Why can't you just behave like your brother? You were born difficult," but always with the same core message, the same verdict, the same gavel coming down. Aurora is the problem. The cruelest thing they ever did was not yell at me, it was make me agree with them. And the worst part, I believed it. That is the part that took me years to understand, years of therapy and long walks and crying in parking lots to unpack. Children do not have the architecture to disbelieve their parents. Their parents are the whole world. So when the whole world tells you that you are broken, you do not argue. You build your entire sense of self around being broken. You become an expert in apologizing. You shrink and shrink and shrink, until you take up so little space that maybe, they will finally stop being disappointed in you. I got straight A's in school, not because I loved learning, though I did actually love it, but because I thought if I was excellent enough, if I was useful enough, if I was good enough in the ways that were visible and measurable, my parents would revise their verdict. They never did. My mother once looked at my report card, 4 A's, 2 A+, a commendation from my English teacher, and said, "That's nice, but you really need to work on your attitude at home." I was 14. I went to my room and sat on the floor and did not cry, because I had already learned that crying made things worse. High school was survival. I made friends the way cautious people make friends, slowly, suspiciously, with one foot always pointed toward the exit. But there was one person who got through, a girl named Beatrice, who sat next to me in sophomore biology, and told me on the first day that my handwriting was beautiful and asked if I wanted to share notes. We were inseparable for 3 years. She was the first person who ever listened to me talk about my family and did not immediately say, "I'm sure they mean well." She said, "That sounds really hard, Aurora, and it sounds really unfair." I remember staring at her. Those 2 sentences, "that sounds really hard, and it sounds really unfair," felt like someone had opened a window in a room I had been suffocating in for years. I did not know what to do with them. I changed the subject, but I held onto those words like a stone in my pocket, something solid to touch in the dark. I graduated valedictorian. My parents came to the ceremony. My mother wore a yellow dress and took photographs. My father shook my hand afterward and said, "Don't let it go to your head." Philip clapped me on the back and said he was proud of me. Daphne gave me a flower crown she had made herself, which made me cry in a way that the valedictorian speech had not. I went to college 3 states away. I told myself it was because of the program, the scholarship, the opportunities. All of that was true. But the truest thing was that I needed to breathe, and I could not breathe in that house. College was the first place I had ever lived where no one had already decided what I was. I walked onto that campus and nobody knew that I was the problem. I was just Aurora, the girl in room 214 with the good handwriting and the nervous laugh and the habit of making too much coffee and offering it to anyone who came by. People liked me. Not despite me, just liked me, plainly and without conditions. It was so disorienting that it took me almost a full semester to stop waiting for the catch. I studied literature. I wrote papers about the ways language shapes identity, and I did not understand until much later how personal that choice was, how desperately I needed to believe that the words used to describe you are not the final word on who you are. I found a therapist in my junior year, a quiet woman named Dr. Ose, who had a plant in the corner of her office that looked like it should have died years ago, but stubbornly refused to. She was the one who first used the term emotional scapegoating in a session, and I remember my brain going very still, like something finally clicking into a lock it had been searching for. A scapegoat, she explained, is the family member who gets assigned the role of carrying all the family's dysfunction. When things go wrong, the scapegoat is blamed, because blaming them keeps everyone else from having to look at themselves. I sat with that for a long time, then I said quietly, so it was never actually about me. No, she said, it never was. It was never actually about me. That sentence saved my life and broke my heart at the same time. I graduated with honors, I moved to a city I loved, I built a life piece by piece. The way you build something when you are teaching yourself that you are allowed to have one, a small apartment with good light, a job at a literary magazine that paid almost nothing but made me feel alive, a circle of people who knew me, the real me, not the verdict, and loved what they found. I called my parents on holidays, I visited once a year, I was polite, I was careful, I maintained the performance of a functional daughter because some part of me still hoped, with the hopeless illogical stubbornness of the child who had believed them in the first place, that they might one day look at me and see someone worth seeing. The breaking point was not dramatic. That is the thing nobody tells you about breaking points, they are almost always quiet. The loudest crises rarely break you. It is the small, specific, ordinary moments that finally do it. I was 26. I had taken time off work to fly home for my mother's birthday. I had spent weeks planning it, found old photographs of her, compiled them into a beautiful book, written captions for each one, picked out a dress she had once admired, had it wrapped in paper she would love. I was excited about it in a way I had not let myself be excited about a family occasion in years. I walked in the door and my mother looked at me and said, before I had even set down my bag, "You've put on weight." My father from the living room said, "We were wondering if you were even going to bother showing up." And Philip, my brother, the golden one, who I had always quietly forgiven for not defending me because he had his own survival to manage, said nothing, just watched the television. I stood there in the doorway of the house where I grew up, holding a gift I had made with love, and I felt something go very quiet inside me. Not cold, not angry, just quiet, like the last note of a song fading out. I put the gift on the table. I said, "Happy birthday, Mom." I stayed for dinner. I helped clean up. I drove to a gas station down the road and sat in my car for 40 minutes, not crying, just sitting, and then I drove to the airport and changed my flight and went home. And I made a decision. I was done. I want to be careful about how I describe what came next, because I have seen stories like this go wrong, the person who cuts off their family and frames it as a victory, as a punishment, as revenge. That was not what I was doing. I was not trying to hurt them. I was trying to survive. There is a difference and it matters. I wrote them a letter. It took me 3 weeks and 11 drafts. I did not write it in anger. I wrote it as clearly and as honestly as I could, the way Dr. Ose had taught me, statting what had happened, what it had cost me, what I needed, and what would happen if things did not change. I told them about the scapegoating. I told them about the weight comment, and the 100 weight comments before it. I told them about the orange juice at the breakfast table when I was 7 years old, and how I had carried that moment in my body for nearly 20 years. I told them I loved them. I told them I was not going to continue having a relationship built on the premise that I was the problem. I said I am not the problem, I never was. I said I am willing to try with a family therapist if you are. I would love nothing more than to have a real relationship with you, but I cannot keep doing this version of one. And then I said, if you are not willing to try, I will be stepping back from contact, not as a punishment, as a necessity. My mother called me 4 days after the letter arrived. She did not address a single word of its contents. She said, "Your father is very hurt, and I don't know where you got these ideas. And after everything we've done for you. My father sent a text message, 3 sentences that said I was ungrateful, that I had always had a chip on my shoulder, and that he hoped I would grow up one day. Philip texted separately and said he thought I was overreacting, but that he understood I was going through something. Daphne, my little sister with the flower crown, called me and cried for 20 minutes, and said she had always known something was wrong, and she was sorry it had taken her this long to say it. I thanked her, then I went quiet. The estrangement lasted 14 months. I need to tell you honestly what those 14 months were like, because it was not the clean, triumphant silence I might have hoped for. It was brutal in ways I had not anticipated. There is a specific grief that comes with estranging yourself from a living parent. It is not like death, where the world understands your loss and brings you casseroles. It is a grief the world does not have language for, a loss people respond to with questions rather than comfort. Have you tried talking to them? Yes, maybe they didn't mean it that way. They did. You'll regret it when they're gone. Maybe, but I was dying slowly by staying. I went to therapy every week. I joined a support group for adult children of emotionally abusive parents and sat in a circle of people who looked, from the outside, just like everyone else, and told stories that made me feel less like a monster for having needs and more like a person who had been handed a map to the wrong country and asked why they kept getting lost. I also, during those 14 months, did something that changed everything. I started writing. Not for the magazine, for myself. Long, sprawling, honest pieces about growing up, about the scapegoat, about what it feels like to be told from the beginning that you are the wound and not the healed. I posted some of them online, anonymously at first under a username that meant nothing. The response was, I do not have a better word for this, overwhelming. Thousands of people. Comments that said I thought I was the only one, and this is my family exactly, and I have never seen it described this clearly before. People who messaged me from countries I had never visited, in languages I had to translate to say, me too, me too, me too. I realized something in those months. The thing my parents had told me, that I was the problem, that I was difficult, that I was born wrong, had not broken only me. It had tried to break me, but in not quite succeeding, it had accidentally made me the kind of person who could reach other people who were broken in the same way. My wound had become something useful, not in a greeting card way, in a very real, very human way. The thing they tried to break me with became the exact thing that let me reach people who needed to hear they weren't alone. The twist, and I know that sounds like a dramatic word, but there is no other word for it, came 13 months into the estrangement, through the most unexpected channel imaginable. My father had a heart attack. It was Daphne who called me at 6:47 in the morning. Her voice doing that thing voices do when they are trying to hold a shape they can no longer hold. He was stable, she said. He had been found in time, he was in the hospital. And then she said very quietly, he asked for you, Aurora, in the ambulance. When they asked him if there was someone he wanted them to call, he said your name. I drove 14 hours. I did not think about whether it was the right decision. I just drove. When I walked into the hospital room, my father looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Leonard, who had always occupied rooms the way weather does, who had been the gravitational center of every family argument and every Sunday dinner, was lying in a hospital bed with tubes in his arm, and the slightly stunned expression of a man who has been confronted with his own mortality and found it nothing like he expected. My mother was in the corner chair, her yellow dress replaced by something practical and tired. She looked at me when I walked in, and for a moment, just a moment, something crossed her face that I had never seen there before, something that was not quite apology but was adjacent to it, something that looked faintly like relief. My father looked at me and said, and these were his exact words, and I have turned them over in my hands every day since, I didn't think you'd come. I sat down in the chair beside him. I said I almost didn't. He nodded like that was fair, like he understood that was fair. We sat in silence for a long time. Then he said, I wasn't a good father to you. I did not know what to do with that. It was not an apology in the full sense, not the accounting I had needed, not the letter back to mine, not the therapy and the reckoning and the real work. But it was a crack in the wall, the first crack in 30 years of wall, and through it I could see something I had not expected, a man who was afraid, who had always been afraid, who had taken his own fear and turned it outward onto the child who reminded him most of himself, the one who felt too much and thought too loudly, and refused to perform contentment when she was not content. I looked like him. I had always looked like him. I had never understood until that hospital room what that had cost him, to look at me every day and see himself. The parts he had buried, the sensitivity he had been taught was weakness, the feelings he had never been allowed to have. I'm not saying this excuses it. I want to be very clear, it does not excuse it. What he did to me shaped the first 20 years of my life in ways I am still mapping. The scars are real. The years are real. The orange juice at the breakfast table is real. None of that disappears because I understand it better. But understanding it let me make a choice from a place of power rather than pain. And that choice was not forgiveness as my parents had always demanded it, the instant, total, sweeping under the rug forgiveness that would have meant pretending none of it happened. It was something smaller and harder and more real. It was, I see you. I see that you are a person, complicated and damaged in your own way, and I am choosing to remain in this story, but on my own terms now. My father did the work. I have to tell you that because it matters and because I did not expect it, and because I think people need to know that it is possible, even late, even after decades. He went to individual therapy, which nearly gave my mother a heart attack of her own because Leonard did not, as a rule, discuss his feelings with anyone, including himself. He read the book Dr. Oz had recommended to me years earlier, the one about family systems and emotional scapegoating, and he called me after finishing it and talked for 45 minutes, which was 43 minutes longer than any phone call we had ever had, and at the end of it he said, "I owe you more than a phone call, but I want to start somewhere." We did family therapy eventually. All of us, me, Philip, Daphne, my parents, in a room with a therapist who was excellent at her job and did not let anyone perform their way through it. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, harder than the estrangement, harder than the driving away, because in that room we had to look at the actual wreckage, all of us, and figure out what could be salvaged and what had to be mourned. Philip cried in the second session. I had never seen my brother cry. He said he had known always that what was happening to me was wrong, and that he had stayed quiet because he had been terrified that if he spoke up, the attention would turn to him. He had survivor's guilt, the therapist said, and he had spent his whole adult life slightly haunted by it. My mother was the hardest. She was not a villain, that is the complicated truth of her. She was a woman who had grown up in her own house of walls and silences, who had married a man who reminded her of her own father, who had learned to survive by becoming invisible and keeping the peace and never, ever confronting the thing that was wrong. She had not protected me. She had not protected me even once in 30 years. And she had to sit in that room and hear that, and not explain it away and hold it. She held it eventually, not all at once. It took time. There were sessions I left furious. There were sessions I left empty. But there were also sessions where something real passed between us, some piece of genuine understanding, and those sessions were unlike anything I had experienced in my family before. I am 29 now. My relationship with my parents is not what I would have written for myself if I had been handed a blank page at age 7. It is imperfect and careful and sometimes still tender in places that hurt to touch. But it is honest in a way it never was before. My father calls me on Tuesdays just to talk. He asks about my writing. He does not always understand it, but he asks and he listens, and that is something I could not have imagined 5 years ago. My mother is learning slowly to say things directly instead of sideways. Last month she called me to tell me she had read one of my essays, one of the ones I had posted anonymously, though she had figured out it was me, and she said, "I didn't know it felt like that for you. I should have known, I should have done better." She did not ask me to agree that she had tried her best. She just said she should have done better. I told her thank you, I meant it. Philip and I are closer now than we have ever been. He has his own therapist. He talks about his guilt openly, which is something I respect enormously because guilt is the thing most people run from hardest. We have dinner every few weeks when I visit, and sometimes we just sit there and shake our heads at the family we grew up in, with the rueful affection of survivors who made it out and have the grace to find some dark humor in it. Daphne is my best friend. That is not a complicated sentence. She is my best friend and she always had a good heart, and sometimes people with good hearts need someone to show them the language for what they already feel. I was able to do that for her. That too was something good that came from the hard thing. I have been thinking in the weeks since I decided to write this all down about what I actually want to say to whoever reads it, what the point of it is, because I am not posting this to relitigate my childhood. I am not posting it to get validation, though if you read all of this and you want to say something kind in the comments, I will not stop you. I am posting it because there is something I needed someone to say to me for most of my life, and nobody said it, and I think maybe some of you need to hear it too. You are not the problem. If your family has always told you that you are the difficult one, the dramatic one, the one who makes everything harder, I want you to hold that verdict up to the light and look at it very carefully, because families are not objective. Families are systems, and systems need someone to carry the weight that nobody else wants to carry, and very often the person they choose to carry it is the one who feels the most, who asks the hardest questions, who refuses to pretend that the emperor is wearing clothes when the emperor is very clearly not wearing clothes. Being the one who cannot pretend is not a flaw, it is in fact the only honest thing in the room. You are allowed to leave, you are allowed to put down the weight, you are allowed to walk out the door of the story you were cast in and go write yourself a new one, in your own handwriting with characters who see you. And then, if you choose to, if it is safe, if it is possible, if you decide it is worth it, you are allowed to go back and try to tell the truth to the people who hurt you, not because they deserve it but because you might, both of you, deserve the chance to know each other differently. It does not always go the way mine went, I know that. Some families are not capable of the crack in the wall, the ambulance, the phone call, the room with the therapist. Some families take the estrangement as confirmation of their original verdict and double down and never look back. That is not your fault. You cannot make someone see you. You can only be seeable and wait and protect yourself while you wait, and eventually stop waiting if waiting costs too much. But I want you to know that sometimes the wall cracks, sometimes the person you had given up on surprises you, sometimes the story has a different ending than the one you were bracing for. Sometimes the story has a different ending than the one you were bracing for, and that is not weakness, that is grace. I used to think that leaving was the strongest thing I ever did. And it was strong, it was the hardest and bravest thing a girl who had been taught she was broken could do, to stand up and say, I disagree, I refuse, I am leaving until you can see me clearly. But I think now that going back might have been stronger. Not the going back of someone who has given up and accepted the old terms, the going back of someone who knows who she is, who has built herself a life and a self and a voice, and who chooses from that solid ground to offer something difficult and frightening and generous, the chance to start over. My father said a thing to me last Tuesday on one of his calls. We were talking about nothing in particular, a book I was reading, some weather in his city, and then out of nowhere, the way revelations tend to arrive, he said, You know, Aurora, you were never the problem. I think I always knew it. I just needed you to be so I didn't have to be. I did not say anything for a moment. Then I said, I know, Dad. And I did, I finally did. I do not know exactly how to end this because the story is not over. I am 29 and it is still being written, and I have learned to make peace with the fact that some stories do not tie up cleanly, and that is not a failure of the story. But I know how I want to end this particular chapter of it, which is like this. Somewhere out there right now, there is a 7-year-old who has knocked over a glass and is being told she is the problem. And she is going to carry that, maybe for 20 years, maybe for more. And some of what she carries will hurt her in ways that take a long time to name. But some of it, some of the weight that was handed to her, some of the sensitivity and the refusal and the inability to pretend, is going to make her extraordinary. It is going to make her the person in a room who names the thing nobody else will name. It is going to make her someone that broken people recognize, across languages and oceans and comment sections, as someone who understands. To that 7-year-old, wherever she is, the orange juice was an accident, you are not the problem, you are going to be okay. And to everyone else reading this, be kind to the people in your life who feel too much. They are usually carrying something for someone else, something that was never theirs to begin with. The least we can do is tell them we see them. We see that they are carrying it, and that they do not have to. That small act, that one quiet sentence offered in the right moment, can open a window in a room where someone has been suffocating. I know because someone did it for me in a sophomore biology class 23 years ago. I know because I have tried to do it for others in the years since. I know because the world does not always change in grand gestures. It changes in small ones, in the cup of coffee extended to a neighbor, in the truth spoken in a hospital room, in the letter written across 14 drafts that finally says the thing that needed saying. It changes in someone deciding, quietly and completely, that the verdict was wrong, and living, from that moment forward, as proof of it.